Welcome to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast is my friend Kurt Francom. Welcome to the podcast, Kurt.
Hey, Richard. Thanks for having me back. I enjoyed the first time we did this, and I appreciate you giving me a few minutes today.
Kurt is calling in over the phone, and we're going to talk about two items. It'll be a shorter podcast. We'll talk about what Kurt does as the founder and executive director of Leading Saints, and we're also going to talk in particular about his upcoming summit that is occurring, starts on September 8th. So, Kurt, why don't we just turn it over to you? Tell us about Leading Saints.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Leading Saints is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to helping Latter-day Saints be better prepared to lead. And this was a sort of a hobby project that started for me back in 2010. Just started as a blog. I had a passion for leadership principles, and I was also being called to leadership callings, and I thought that's worth talking about as those two worlds together. And so it started out as a blog, and then 2014 we launched the Leading. It was initially called Leading LDS, but now it's Leading Saints. But in 2014 is when we started the podcast, and then 2016 we became an official 501c3 nonprofit, and then since then we've been growing and reaching audiences around the world, speaking about leadership in the context of serving as a Latter-day Saint. So is that a good summary?
That's a great summary. Give us an idea of how many people are connected to you. Do you have a way to measure that with podcasts or newsletter? And if I, as a listener, I'm just wanting to connect with Leading Saints and get on your newsletter list or connect, how would I do that? So that's kind of two questions.
Yeah. So our reach is, really all over the world, spread out, similar to maybe how you'd see the general membership of the church spread out. But and as you know, it's sometimes hard to really nail down the podcast numbers, but we can look at downloads pretty accurately, and we reach about 220,000 downloads a month. And
wow, that's great.
We're approaching 4 million total downloads, and that just grows month after month. And we have not only our podcast, which is probably our more popular piece of content that we put together, but we also have on our website at leadingsaints.org. We have thousands of articles that all sorts of people have contributed to, speaking about all sorts of leadership principles in the context of being a Latter-day Saint. And then we have a weekly newsletter that goes out with unique content. And then another core effort that we do are these virtual summits. Because what I found is that there are certain topics that are that leaders, depending on their calling, are always focused on, whether it's welfare, whether it's motivating people, whether it's teaching people. And so we like to do 3 or 4 times a year a virtual summit where we do a deep dive into a specific topic. So we've done motivating saints to help people figure out how to motivate those that they lead, and that was a big question that we got back from our audiences. We just don't know how to motivate people. We ask them to do things and they don't do them, and so how can we better approach that? And then we've done one called Teaching Saints, and then also Questioning Saints, which your brother was quite involved with, and Questioning Saints focused on how to minister to individuals who begin to question their faith, and tactics, resources, conversations that one can have in order to effectively approach that, because you can't be a leader for too long without realizing that people are having sincere questions, and some of those questions can be answered easily, and a lot of them can't be answered. And so there really is a method to approaching that type of thing. So those virtual summits are a big part of the content that we try and put out. And each session, or each one of those summits, will have anywhere from 15 to 30 presenters, experts and leaders, and all giving their perspective around that specific topic. So that's sort of the roundabout way that we try and serve the listening audience or the Leading Saints audience. And most of it can be found just by visiting leadingsaints.org or subscribing to the podcast, much like you're listening to this one.
Thank you for what you're doing. I've loved many of your podcasts. The Anthony Sweat podcast, I don't want to recap it, but it was just one of my favorite. There was a Relief Society president I listened to, and I just love the stories and the principles and the insights that you're sharing that help me as a listener and each of us in our individual callings. And tell our listeners, this is an unusual ministry, Kurt. You probably, if I go to LDS Tools, I assume you have a calling that shows up there. And
Yep.
this doesn't show up there, obviously. Just help is there a story just why you felt impressed to step in this space?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it all began back when I was fresh off my mission from Sacramento, California, and I did what most young Latter-day Saints do: is they find a YSA ward to attend, and so I did that. Attended one we met on the Institute building at the Salt Lake Community College campus in Taylorsville, Utah. And I started attending there, and before I knew it, I had been asked to serve as the Elders Quorum president. And this wasn't just any typical Elders Quorum. There was well over 100 elders in this quorum, all looking at me as their leader. And I think the Doctrine and Covenants says you should only have 96, but we broke that rule, and they probably should have split it. But it was a growing ward, and this was my first experience with leadership, and I'd been a district leader on my mission, but that had just been a handful of companionships that I was interacting with. But now I was faced with hundreds of people, looking to come to church, have an uplifting experience, hopefully connecting with the Spirit and being engaged in the gospel and home teaching as it was back then. And I felt like I wanted to do a really good job, and I tried really, really hard. I fell into the same pitfalls that a lot of leaders do. I gave a really good guilt trip lesson about home teaching. I didn't delegate because I didn't really know what that looked like or what I was supposed to delegate. And I spent a lot of time just burning the candle at both ends, trying to make a difference. And I was fortunate enough to meet my wife in that ward, and we dated and soon became engaged and married, and obviously moved out of that ward. And I remember leaving that experience just feeling like I didn't really move the needle. Like, I've tried really, really hard, and I thought I was going to make a difference, and I don't think I really did. Now, of course, we're always our own worst critic, and so maybe others would think I did a fine job. But I was really just sort of disappointed by that experience because it didn't turn out as easy as I thought it would. A few years later, I served in a bishopric, and then for a couple of years, and then that bishop was released, and I was called as the high priest group leader. And I thought, oh no, here I go again. I want to excel as a leader and be a really good leader that people can turn to and find support. But I tried that before, and it didn't really work. And so I turned to resources, trying to find online individuals who are maybe talking about their experience as a leader, or a book, or anything, and I just wasn't finding anything in the context of being a Latter-day Saint. And I couldn't understand why I could go into a Barnes & Noble bookstore and see bookshelves full of life leadership, business leadership, all sorts of leadership books and principles and research, but nobody was talking about these principles in the context of being a leader in a lay ministry in the church. And so I thought, well, I'm no leadership expert or guru, but maybe I could create a platform to bring to bring the gurus, to bring the experts, to bring the people who've really thought about some of the issues that leaders face, and we can have a discussion and start talking about principles. And not that there's a right way or a wrong way to be a leader in the church, but maybe those principles can be applied individually to those that listen, and we can enhance the leadership ability within the church, because there's something about volunteer leadership that is so fascinating to me. And John Maxwell, the famous Christian leadership author, he's talked about this dynamic of, it's one thing to find a bunch of Fortune 500 CEOs who are leaders and talk to them about leadership, but they will know nothing about leadership until they've led in a volunteer organization. And that's so true when you get these callings, because you don't have the same levers that maybe a manager or boss would have in a secular job. You can't, take away a bonus. You can't threaten salary or pay. And really, if you offend, you may scare them off altogether. So there's some unique aspects of being a church leader, especially a lay leader who wants to make a difference. And so we really want to speak to that dynamic and feel like there's a lot of angles to speak to, or a lot of principles to speak to, that would really help a lot of leaders. And so that began, I bought the domain name leadinglds.com, and it's grown since then. And now we're thriving as leadingsaints.org.
And you have a really broad reach. You released a podcast that we recorded, and in that podcast, I gave my email out if people would like a copy of my slides, and I've been getting a lot of emails, Kurt.
Yeah.
So
I should have warned you, I guess. But
I just recognize, and these are all over the world. It's not just along the Wasatch Front. So the reach you've created and the content you're providing is really needed and very helpful. So thank you for what you're doing. And it's probably the kind of ministry where there's a lot of people that don't ever get a chance to look you in the eye and email your message and just say that what you're providing in that podcast or newsletter, your own personal insights, has helped me do better. And also sometimes take off the pressure of leaders where we get in some pretty overwhelming assignments. I think you've also done some of that where we feel better as local leaders, because these assignments can be pretty intense at times. So I've loved that balance you've provided, and just, helping people feel at peace. They're doing their best, even if they can't do everything that they might like to do.
Right. Yeah. And, it's, I always tell people it's a lot of work. There are some bad days, some tough days in doing this type of work, but luckily it's so much fun, like talking about these principles and seeing, light bulbs go on for leaders who suddenly think of a new idea or get that inspiration that can make a difference in their quorum or ward. It's just so fun and motivating that way.
That is great. Let's talk about you started virtual summits before COVID. It sounds like you.
Yeah.
This obviously now just continues to work. We all are anxious for COVID to end, but the work you're doing with virtual summits will continue. Talk about the event on September 8th.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, we do virtual summits where we like to take a topic or a leadership dynamic that typical leaders struggle with and do a deep dive and see what we can discover that way. And so obviously one, and you know this better than anyone, the concept of LGBTQ Latter-day Saints and making more space and more room for them in our religious communities. And so that's our sort of the next focus of our virtual summit, called LGBT Saints, helping Latter-day Saints be better prepared to minister to LGBT Latter-day Saints. And our hope here is to gather 20 plus individuals who can speak to this topic, to the experience of those that are LGBT, and how can we as leaders better minister to them. So oftentimes, and we're doing this in conjunction with NorthStar, and you've had various people from NorthStar on your podcast before, and I actually have the opportunity to serve on their board of directors. And so we're joining forces with them as in order to help leaders more. A virtual summit targeted at leaders or those striving to better minister to LGBTQ Latter-day Saints and talk about it. Start a dialogue. We try and focus really on three type of people that we bring in to present. One would be the experts, right? Maybe the therapists, the PhDs, the individuals who've done the research, and better understanding that in the context of being LGBT in the church. And then we bring in those that do consider themselves LGBTQ and talk about their experience, the hurt, the the excitement, the encouragement, the good, the bad, the ugly, and try and understand what that experience is like to bring more empathy and understanding for leaders and give them a better way to approach that in their own wards and quorums. And then lastly, just other leaders who have maybe found something that works, and again, there's never one right way or a certain formula that's going to work in every location in the church. But, you mentioned in our conversation about, I think, President Fersch, I think is his name, out in California that you interacted with.
Yes.
And I had a short conversation with him, just the different things that he's tried and his work and that he's finding success with, and just to hear his journey about, how to even start that dialogue or that conversation in a stake, and how to have a stake, how to prepare your stake so that the next stake conference that we can hear from some of those LGBTQ saints that are in our local community and better empathize with them and understand their experience and make more room and space for them to have that religious experience that we all seek when we come to church. And so we try and just get as many angles as possible. And of course, with 20 to 30 spots that we're filling, we'll probably never cover every angle. And thankfully, we have resources like this podcast and others where people can go and find more understanding, more stories. But we're gonna start it there. And the nice thing about these summits is that they never really end, right? We can always add more interviews, more presentations, and so forth to these virtual summits. So it'll be an ongoing thing and a library that'll continue to grow. And the nice thing is we make them completely free. Starting on September 8th, you just have to register with your email address, and then every day we release 2 of these presentations that you can watch for free for 24 hours, and then the next day a new set of interviews or presentations are there to watch. And so it's available for everybody, and really, if there's individuals listening that are LGBTQ and they think, "Man, I wish my bishop did a better job with this," or "I wish my Relief Society president understood me more," like, this is a great opportunity to reach out to them and say, "Hey, I would really appreciate. It would mean a lot to me if you would virtually attend this summit, because I would love for you to." For us to have more dialogue and conversation, and maybe this is a good starting point for a lot of those leaders.
That's cool, and I love your invitation there to LGBTQ people. This is just so I understand. This is obviously it starts on September 8th with 2 being released per day. So this would, with 20 to 30 speakers, that's roughly a 10 to 15 day event. Does that sound right?
Yep. Typically they go about 2 weeks, and we usually we release 3 or 4 to take us through the weekend from to Saturday and through Sunday. But yeah, so it's an ongoing thing. We try and not release too much content where you're overwhelmed with trying to get through it all. But hopefully in a typical day, you'll be able to sit down and enjoy those presentations as they're released.
And they're not live then, are they pre-recorded?
Yep, just like you and I have already recorded your session, and I actually pushed it out through our Leading Saints podcast to give people a sense of the quality of content and inspiration of the content that'll be released. And so they're all pre-recorded, and so you can maybe watch 30 minutes in the morning and then maybe pause and come back at your lunch break and finish the rest and enjoy it that way.
Do you want to give do you want to share additional speakers that will be part of it, or do you want to just have people go to your website to learn that?
Well, you can definitely see a lot of the speakers. Right now we're in the midst of recording them and finalizing that, so we don't really have a final list yet, but just to give you an idea of some of the people that I've already recorded with, Ben Schilaty's one that's one of be too unfamiliar to your audience. He did a great job talking about the importance of an individual coming out and why that needs to happen and why and the typical phases you see in that. Blake Fisher, who works down at BYU, who works in the Success and Inclusion department. he has a great perspective with meeting with LGBTQ Latter-day Saints and really, I guess, students, I should say. They're not all Latter-day Saints at BYU, but he has a great perspective. Chelsea Chipman is a CES instructor, and she has taught at UVU, the institute there at UVU. Has a great perspective of just creating a classroom setting that is welcoming to LGBTQ saints. And then, the who's who of NorthStar, Jeff Benyon, Ty Mansfield has a remarkable presentation about the balance between love and law, right? And where do we find that balance? I think that's where a lot of leaders struggle with. That how can I, be open and show all this love, but not necessarily condone it, or still respect the doctrines of the gospel. And you yourself, Richard, are a great example of that balance. Like, it can be done, and I think with a little help, it really anybody can do that. And so Scott and Becky Mackintosh will be presenting just from the parent perspective, and I know you've talked with them before. They have an awesome perspective on being a parent and being open and welcoming and attending weddings and helping organize weddings, and just the blessing that can be for a family, but also for church leaders. So, and of course you, Richard, you're going to be in that lineup. You'll probably be near the front of of those that we release. And like I said, people can preview that interview on the Leading Saints podcast, and it's awesome. So that gives you an idea of a handful of the presenters we'll have.
That's great. I know all of those presenters except Chelsea, but I love the work she's doing as you describe what Chelsea Chipman's doing and the importance of a classroom setting. So I love the broad scope you have here, Kurt, and I just recognize, as you know well, that there's such a need in our faith for conversations in this space. It's sort of like the conversation all of us want to have, but we don't quite know how to do it. We don't know how to bring it up at church. In most congregations, and a lot of leaders and a lot of members, and obviously LGBTQ people. So I think this is just what you're doing is just helping us fulfill the mission of the church to minister to individual members and to create a welcoming and inclusive and helpful environment. And I love that you've got some LGBTQ people as part of that, because that's obviously where my journey really started, was listening to LGBTQ voices, Ben and Blake, plus Jeff and Ty, or the couple others that you mentioned, I believe will be great. So anything else you want to share in the podcast?
I just hope those listening will feel encouraged to attend. Obviously it's virtually, so you can do it from the comfort of your home. I hope that you will see this as an opportunity to maybe start that dialogue with a bishop, a Relief Society president, a leader in your life, that maybe even those you've struggled with, or even parents as well, that maybe there's some strained relationships with parents. And maybe this can be a step saying, hey, would you mind attending this and just watching some of these presentations, and can we talk about it later? And for leaders out there that might be listening, these are crucial opportunities, because I remember as a bishop feeling that pressure that I had to have the right answer, or I had to share the right scripture that would solve the problem. And I soon realized it wasn't about having the answer, but it was all about having the conversation. And there'll probably be parts of this summit that maybe we said something not exactly awesome, or maybe a presenter meant one thing but said another thing. But I hope those attending see it as, hey, look, this organization's trying. They're trying to start a dialogue, a conversation, or add to it. And so I hope you see this as an opportunity to reach out to the leaders in your life and say, I'd like to try and connect again, and maybe this is a good first step.
That is great. In closing, just remind our listeners exactly where to go to register for the conference.
Yep, the best place to go is leadingsaints.org/LGBT, and that will get you to where you need to go. If you're on the go right now, you can actually text the word LEAD, LEAD, to 474747, and you'll get a quick text back that'll send you to the page you want to go to register. And it's free to register. Just put in your email address, and then we begin on September 8th.
It's awesome. Thank you, Kurt Francom, for joining us on an episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, and thank you for your great work at Leading Saints. And I encourage all of our listeners to attend that virtual summit and invite others in your circle to attend that also. We'll put links to the summit in our podcast description so you can link to it directly from this podcast description wherever you're listening. Thank you for joining us.